Skeptical of the young man's character, the millionaire puts him to a test. The outcome defies his assumptions and leads to an unexpected bond. And if you cherish your family and love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and avoid 10 years of bad luck. Stephen Harper sat at the head of the mahogany conference table in his Manhattan office, surrounded by executives in tailored suits. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, a constant reminder of his success. He adjusted his Rolex watch and leaned back in his leather chair, listening to his colleagues discuss their latest acquisition. The problem with these smaller companies, Stephen said, cutting through the conversation, is that they lack our standards. Their employees simply don't understand our corporate culture. He picked up his crystal water glass, custom-etched with his initials. Take my new project manager, for instance. Ivy League education, proper background. That's what maintains our reputation. Around the table, heads nodded in agreement. James Peterson, his VP of Operations, chimed in, "Couldn't agree more, Stephen. Last week, I interviewed a candidate from a state college. Bright enough, but not our caliber. You can't mix oil and water." From the corner of the room, Clara Martinez quietly refilled coffee cups. She'd worked as Stephen's housekeeper for 8 years, and part of her duties included serving at his home office meetings. Her uniform, pressed white shirt and black pants, was designed to make her invisible to the executives, but her presence gave her a window into their world. Stephen continued, "It's not elitism, it's maintaining standards. My father built this company on excellence, and I won't dilute that legacy with diversity hire programs and feel-good initiatives." He gestured dismissively. Merit should be the only criterion. Clara's hand trembled slightly as she poured coffee into Stephen's cup, but her face remained composed. She'd heard similar conversations before, but today felt different. Her son Kevin's college acceptance letter had arrived that morning. Full academic scholarship to Columbia University. The pride she felt was tempered by knowing the barriers he would face. After the meeting, as executives filed out, Clara began clearing the cups. Stephen remained, reviewing documents on his tablet. She gathered her courage and approached his chair. "Mr. Harper," she said, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Stephen looked up, surprised. Clara rarely initiated conversation. "What is it?" "It's about my son, Kevin," she began. "He's graduating high school next month, valedictorian of his class. He's received a full scholarship to Columbia University." Stephen's expression remained neutral, but his eyebrows raised slightly. "Columbia? That's unexpected." "He's very bright, Mr. Harper. He's already developed a small application that helps local businesses manage their inventory. Several stores in our neighborhood use it." Clara pulled out her phone, showing him the simple but elegant interface Kevin had designed. Stephen glanced at it briefly, more out of politeness than interest. "That's nice, Clara. But why are you telling me this?" "Kevin needs an internship for the summer. He's applied to several companies, but..." She hesitated. "The opportunities are limited for someone from our neighborhood." Stephen leaned back, studying Clara. He'd never really thought about her life outside of work, let alone considered that she might have a son headed to an Ivy League school. Part of him wanted to dismiss the request outright. He had a strict policy about nepotism, even for executives' children. But something in Clara's dignified stance made him pause. "An internship," he said slowly. "Clara, our internship program is highly competitive. We have applicants from the best schools with impressive connections and backgrounds. All Kevin needs is AC. Hands to prove himself," Clara replied, her voice firm despite her nervousness. "He's worked hard for everything he's achieved." Stephen drummed his fingers on the table, an idea forming. "Fine," he said finally. "I'll give him a chance, but on my terms. He'll have to complete a series of challenges I'll design. If he succeeds, he'll get the internship. If he fails, we never discuss this again." Clara nodded, relief visible on her face. "Thank you, Mr. Harper. That's all he needs, a chance." As Clara left the room, Stephen already began formulating the challenges in his mind. He'd make them difficult enough to prove his point about maintaining standards. After all, he thought, sometimes the best way to teach a lesson was to let someone fail on their own. What he didn't realize was that this decision would set in motion events that would challenge everything he believed about success, merit, and the true measure of a person's worth. The community center in East Harlem buzzed with activity on a warm spring afternoon. Stephen stood in the doorway, watching as Kevin organized volunteers for the upcoming charity event. He'd deliberately chosen this as the first challenge, organizing a fundraiser for an underfunded after-school program. It was the kind of task that required both business acumen and social skills, something Stephen believed would quickly expose Kevin's limitations. "We'll set up the registration tables here," Kevin directed, pointing to a diagram he'd drawn on a whiteboard. "The flow needs to be intuitive: registration, then information stations, then the donation area." He spoke with quiet confidence, making eye contact with each volunteer. Stephen checked his phone, noting that Kevin had arrived 2 hours before him to set everything up. The boy wore a simple button-down shirt and khakis, clearly his best outfit, though it paled next to Stephen's tailored suit. "Mr. Harper," Kevin approached him, extending his hand. "Thank you for this opportunity. I've prepared a brief overview of our event strategy, including budget projections and expected outcomes." He handed Stephen a professionally bound presentation folder. Flipping through the pages, Stephen found himself surprised by the thoroughness of the analysis. Kevin had included demographic data of the neighborhood, historical donation patterns, and a clear marketing strategy targeting local businesses. "You did all this in 3 days?" Stephen asked, keeping his tone neutral. "Yes, sir. I also developed a simple app for the volunteers to track donations and manage guest information." Kevin pulled out his tablet, demonstrating a clean, user-friendly interface. "It'll help us analyze which approaches are most effective for future events." Throughout the afternoon, Stephen observed Kevin's interactions. He watched as the young man helped an elderly volunteer understand the donation system, his patience evident in his clear explanations and gentle demeanor. When a group of rowdy teenagers entered the center, Kevin engaged them immediately, turning their energy into enthusiasm for helping with the setup. "These kids come to the after-school program," Kevin explained later, as they reviewed the day's progress. "I used to be one of them. That's why this matters. It's not just about raising money. It's about showing them there's a path forward." The event itself exceeded expectations. Kevin's organizational system ran smoothly, and his app accurately tracked donations in real time. Local business owners, impressed by his presentation skills, made substantial pledges. By the end of the day, they'd raised 40% more than the center's previous fundraising record. Stephen stood at the back of the room, watching Kevin thank the volunteers and coordinate the cleanup. Something uncomfortable stirred in his chest. Not quite admiration, but a nagging sense that his assumptions might need revision. "Impressive work," he conceded when Kevin approached him at the end of the day. "But organizing a charity event is one thing. The business world is far more complex." Kevin met his gaze steadily. "I understand, Mr. Harper. What's the next challenge?" "There's a financial problem I've been working on, a struggling local business district that could use revitalization. I want you to analyze it and propose a solution. You'll present to my executive team next week." "Thank you for the opportunity," Kevin replied, his expression serious. "I won't let you down." As Stephen drove home in his luxury car, he found himself thinking about Kevin's comment about the after-school program. He'd always viewed charity as a tax write-off, a necessary part of maintaining corporate image. But Kevin's approach had been different: personal, invested, strategic, yet compassionate. "It's just good marketing," Stephen muttered to himself, trying to dismiss the impact of what he'd witnessed. But even as he said it, he knew something had shifted. The next challenge would need to be significantly harder. He needed to prove to himself that his worldview wasn't as shakable as it suddenly felt. What he didn't realize was that each challenge he set for Kevin would not only test the young man's abilities, but would also force Stephen to confront his own deeply held beliefs about success, privilege, and the true meaning of merit. Kevin sat at his small desk in his family's apartment, surrounded by financial reports and market analyses. The financial enigma Stephen had presented involved a declining business district in the South Bronx, an area with high potential but struggling with systematic disinvestment. Through his open window, the sounds of the neighborhood filtered in: children playing, music from car radios, the constant pulse of city life. His laptop displayed multiple spreadsheets, each tab representing a different aspect of the problem. vacancy rates, business turnover, demographic shifts, and property values. "You're overthinking it," Mia Rodriguez said from where she sat cross-legged on his bed. She'd been his best friend since middle school, and her practical mindset often helped ground his analytical tendencies. "Look at what's actually happening on those streets, not just the numbers." Mia worked part-time at her family's bodega, one of the few businesses that had survived the area's economic downturn. "Every day, I see people who want to support local businesses, but they can't find what they need here anymore. They end up taking their money to other neighborhoods." Kevin pushed back from his desk, rubbing his eyes. "You're right. The data shows the problem, but it doesn't show the solution." He pulled up another document. "Look at this. Most of the building owners don't live in the neighborhood. They have no personal stake in its success. Classic absentee landlord problem," Mia nodded. "But what if we could change that equation?" For the next several hours, they dissected the problem from every angle. Kevin mapped out financial flows while Mia contributed real-world insights from her experience in the neighborhood. Together, they began to see patterns emerging, opportunities hidden within what looked like insurmountable challenges. "What if," Kevin said slowly, an idea forming, "we could create a community investment trust, something that would give local residents partial ownership in these properties?" Mia leaned forward, interested. "Like a cooperative? Similar but more structured. We could work with existing property owners, offering them guaranteed income streams in exchange for partial community ownership. Local residents could buy shares for as little as $10 a month, building equity while having a say in which businesses lease the spaces." They worked late into the night, refining the concept. Kevin built financial models showing how the trust could become self-sustaining within 5 years. Mia helped identify potential anchor tenants, businesses that would draw customers and support smaller enterprises. The day of the presentation arrived. Stephen sat at the head of the conference table, surrounded by his executive team. Kevin stood before them, his presentation ready. "The challenge isn't just financial," Kevin began, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "It's about creating a sustainable ecosystem where both property owners and community members benefit." For the next hour, he laid out his proposal. He showed how the Community Investment Trust would work, backed by solid financial projections. He explained how technology could streamline the process, making it accessible to everyone in the community. Most importantly, he demonstrated how the model could be replicated in other neighborhoods, creating a scalable solution to urban decay. The executives exchanged glances as Kevin spoke. This wasn't just a band-aid solution. It was a comprehensive strategy that addressed root causes while promising reasonable returns on investment. Stephen listened intently, his expression unreadable. When Kevin finished, there was a moment of silence. "What about risk management?" one executive asked. "How do you protect against default?" Kevin pulled up another slide. "The model includes a 3-tier security system," he explained, walking them through the safeguards he'd built in. Every potential objection had been anticipated and addressed. After the presentation, Stephen approached Kevin. "You've clearly put a lot of thought into this," he said carefully. "But ideas are easy. Implementation is what matters." "I agree," Kevin replied. "That's why I've already spoken with 3 property owners who are interested in piloting the program. They're willing to meet with you to discuss terms." Stephen raised an eyebrow. "You've been busy. You gave me a challenge, Mr. Harper. I wanted to show you not just an idea, but a viable path forward." As Kevin packed up his materials, Stephen remained in the conference room, lost in thought. The proposal wasn't just good. It was innovative in a way that challenged his assumptions about community development and investment. More disturbing still, it forced him to confront his own role in perpetuating the very problems Kevin was trying to solve. The next challenge, Stephen decided, would need to be different. He needed to understand not just what Kevin could do, but who he was, and for that, he would need to step out of his comfort zone and into Kevin's world. Stephen found himself standing in his kitchen one evening, watching Clara prepare dinner. For 8 years, she had moved through his house like a shadow, efficient and unobtrusive. Now, he really looked at her for the first time. "Clara," he said, causing her to pause in her work. "Would you sit down for a moment? I'd like to talk." Surprise flickered across her face, but she wiped her hands on her apron and sat at the kitchen island. Stephen took the seat across from her, feeling strangely uncomfortable in his own home. "Your son," he began, "he's quite remarkable. I'd like to understand what shaped him into who he is." Clara's hands folded neatly on the countertop. "Life shaped him, Mr. Harper. Our struggles, our joys, they all played their part." "Tell me about those struggles," Stephen said, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. Clara was quiet for a moment, then began speaking. "I came to this country 20 years ago with nothing but hope and determination. Kevin was 3 years old. His father had died in an accident, leaving us alone. I cleaned houses during the day and worked in a laundromat at night. Kevin spent his evenings doing homework in the back room of that laundromat." Stephen listened as Clara described years of careful budgeting, of choosing between new shoes for Kevin or paying for his computer classes. She told him about the time Kevin won his first coding competition using a borrowed laptop that could barely run the software. "There was a night," Clara continued, her voice softening, "when Kevin was 14. I found him crying over his textbooks. He said he was tired of being poor, tired of watching me work so hard. I told him that poverty was our circumstance, not our destiny. The next day, he started teaching himself programming through free online courses." Stephen felt a tightness in his chest. He thought about his own children, their private schools, and unlimited resources. "Weren't you ever bitter?" he asked. "About the unfairness of it all?" Clara met his eyes steadily. "Bitterness is a luxury we couldn't afford, Mr. Harper. Every minute spent being bitter was a minute we weren't spending on moving forward." The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator. Stephen thought about the countless times he'd walked past Clara without really seeing her, the assumptions he'd made about her life and capabilities. "The day Kevin got his scholarship to Columbia," Clara said, a smile touching her lips, "he didn't celebrate immediately. Instead, he sat down and created a study guide for other students in his school, sharing everything he'd learned about the application process. That's who my son is, Mr. Harper. His success means nothing to him if he can't use it to help others succeed too." Stephen stood and walked to the window, looking out at the manicured garden below. "I've been wrong about many things, Clara," he said finally. "We're all wrong sometimes," she replied gently. "The question is what we do when we realize it." That evening, after Clara left, Stephen remained in the kitchen, his usual evening scotch untouched before him. He thought about the countless meetings where he dismissed candidates because they didn't fit his narrow definition of success. He thought about the community programs his company had rejected funding because he couldn't see their value. His phone buzzed, a message from Kevin thanking him for the opportunity to present his community investment trust idea. The message ended with a suggestion for the next challenge, something involving direct community engagement. Stephen put down his phone and made a decision. The next challenge wouldn't come from him. Instead, he would challenge himself to step into Kevin's world, to understand the community he'd spent years judging from a distance. What he didn't know was that this decision would lead to discoveries about himself and his own values that would shake the very foundation of his carefully constructed worldview. The small coffee shop buzzed with activity as Kevin and Mia spread their papers across a worn wooden table. Around them, locals chatted in a mix of English and Spanish, while the smell of fresh coffee and pastries filled the air. "We could call it Bridge Solutions," Mia suggested, sketching a logo on her notepad, "because we're literally bridging the gap between talent and opportunity." Kevin nodded, typing on his laptop. The mission statement needs to be clear: empowering underserved youth through education, mentorship, and real-world business experience. He paused, looking up as the shop's door opened. Stephen Harper entered, looking notably out of place in his casual attempt at informal wear, a polo shirt that probably cost more than most people's weekly salary. He spotted Kevin and Mia making his way to their table. "Mr. Harper," Kevin stood to greet him. "Thank you for coming. This is Mia Rodriguez, my partner in this project." Stephen shook Mia's hand, noting her firm grip and direct gaze. "Kevin tells me you're the one who helped shape the community investment trust idea." "I just provided the ground-level perspective," Mia replied. "Kevin's the one who turned it into a workable model." They spent the next hour outlining their vision for the nonprofit organization. Kevin explained how they plan to identify talented youth in underserved communities and connect them with business opportunities and mentorship. Mia detailed their outreach strategy, which included partnerships with local schools and community centers. The key, Kevin explained, pulling up a spreadsheet, is sustainability. We're not looking for handouts. We want to create a self-sustaining model where successful participants become mentors themselves. Stephen studied their business plan, occasionally asking pointed questions about funding, scalability, and risk management. To his surprise, they had answers ready for each query, backed by data and practical considerations. "You've clearly thought this through," Stephen admitted. "But running a nonprofit is different from theoretical planning. Have you considered the regulatory requirements? The administrative overhead?" "Actually," Mia interjected, "I've been interning at a local nonprofit for the past year. I've seen firsthand what works and what doesn't. We've built those lessons into our model." Stephen leaned back, taking in the energy and determination radiating from these two young people. He thought about Clara's words about bitterness versus forward movement. "I could help," he found himself saying. "Not just with money, but with connections, business strategy, legal support." Kevin and Mia exchanged glances. "That would be incredible," Kevin said carefully, "but we want to maintain our vision. This needs to serve the community, not become another corporate charity project." Stephen felt a smile tugging at his lips. A month ago, he would have been offended by such a condition. Now, he understood. "Agreed," he said. "You lead, I'll advise. But first, let me show you how to strengthen your financial projections. You're missing some key tax advantages in your current model." For the next several hours, they worked together, Stephen sharing insights from his years of business experience while Kevin and Mia contributed their understanding of community needs. The plan evolved, becoming more robust without losing its core mission. As the coffee shop began to close, Stephen looked around at the neighborhood he'd previously only seen through his car windows. He watched as Kevin and Mia greeted various locals by name, explaining their project in fluent Spanish to an elderly woman who ran the bakery next door. "We're planning a launch event," Kevin said as they packed up. "Nothing fancy, just a community gathering to introduce the concept and get feedback." "I'd like to help with that too," Stephen offered. "But on your terms, this is your vision." What none of them realized was that this launch event would become far more significant than they planned, setting in motion a chain of events that would test not only their new partnership, but also their individual principles and resilience. The community center's gymnasium had been transformed. Folding chairs faced a small stage, while information booths lined the walls. Kevin and Mia moved through the space, directing volunteers and checking details against their meticulously prepared checklist. "The press will be here in an hour," Mia said, adjusting a banner that read "Bridge Solutions, Building Tomorrow Together." "Are you sure about letting Stephen speak? This wasn't part of the original plan." Kevin paused from setting up the audio-visual equipment. "He's changed, Mia. You should see how he's been working with the legal team to structure everything. He actually listens now." On the other side of the gymnasium, Stephen reviewed his notes. He'd never felt nervous about public speaking before, but this was different. His usual corporate speeches about quarterly earnings and market expansion seemed hollow compared to what he planned to say today. The gymnasium began filling with people. Local business owners, students, community leaders, and families. Clara arrived, wearing a dress instead of her uniform, looking proud as she watched Kevin direct the proceedings. Just as the event was about to begin, Stephen's phone buzzed. The message made his blood run cold. "Breaking news. Harper Industries CEO Stephen Harper under investigation for financial irregularities." He quickly opened the article. His former Bizine, SS partner Richard Maxwell, had gone to the press with allegations of systematic financial fraud within Harper Industries. The accusations were detailed, damaging, and worst of all, partially true, though not in the way Maxwell presented them. "Mr. Harper?" Kevin approached, tablet in hand. "We're ready to start." He stopped, seeing Stephen's expression. "What's wrong?" Stephen handed him the phone. Kevin read quickly, his face growing serious. The article detailed allegations of manipulated books, hidden accounts, and questionable overseas transactions. While Stephen hadn't directly orchestrated these activities, He had looked the other way when Maxwell suggested certain creative accounting practices years ago. "The press will be here any minute," Kevin said quietly. "They're not coming for our launch anymore. They're coming for you." Stephen stood, straightening his jacket. "I should leave. I can't let this scandal taint your organization before it even starts." "No," Kevin said firmly. "Running away will only make it look worse. We need to address this head-on." Mia joined them, having seen the news on her phone. The reporters are outside, at least 50 of them. Stephen looked around the gymnasium at the gathered community members, people who had come hoping for opportunity, for change. His presence could destroy everything Kevin and Mia had worked for. "Let me handle this," Kevin said, already typing on his tablet. "We'll need to modify your speech. Instead of just talking about supporting our initiative, you'll need to address these allegations. But we'll do it our way, with transparency and focus on community impact." "Kevin," Stephen protested, "you don't understand. Some of these allegations, there's truth to them. Maxwell and I, years ago, we made choices. Then it's time to make different choices," Kevin replied, his voice steady. "Starting now." The doors opened, and reporters began flooding in, cameras flashing. The gymnasium buzzed with whispers as people checked their phones, realizing what was happening. Stephen felt the weight of every eye in the room. His instinct was to call his PR team, to handle this the corporate way, with carefully crafted statements and legal buffers. But as he looked at Kevin's determined face, he made a decision that would forever alter both their lives. "Tell me what to do," he said to Kevin. What followed would become one of the most remarkable press conferences in recent memory, though not for the reasons anyone expected. The real story wasn't in the scandal itself, but in how two men from vastly different worlds chose to handle it. The gymnasium crackled with tension as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. Kevin took command of the situation with unexpected authority, stepping up to the microphone before anyone else could speak. "Good evening," he began, his voice clear and steady. "I'm Kevin Martinez, co-founder of Bridge Solutions. We're here tonight to talk about community transformation, and that's exactly what we're going to do, though perhaps not in the way we originally planned." He gestured to Stephen, who stood beside him, looking uncharacteristically vulnerable in front of the cameras. "Mr. Harper stands accused of financial impropriety. He could have chosen to handle this from behind lawyers and PR teams. Instead, he's here, facing you directly." Stephen stepped forward, fighting against years of corporate instinct that screamed at him to stay silent. "The allegations made by Richard Maxwell contain elements of truth," he admitted, causing an eruption of camera flashes and shouted questions. 8 years ago, we implemented accounting practices that, while technically legal, pushed ethical boundaries. Kevin watched the reporters scribbling furiously, then continued. "But this story isn't about past mistakes. It's about what we do next." Bridge Solutions was founded on the principle that everyone deserves a second chance. That transformation is posse. Believe when people choose to do better. From her seat in the front row, Clara watched with tears in her eyes as her son managed the crisis with grace and wisdom beyond his years. Mia stood at the back of the stage, tablet in hand, monitoring social media reactions and feeding real-time updates to Kevin through text messages. "Over the past month," Kevin continued, "I've watched Mr. Harper confront his prejudices and change his worldview. Now he faces another choice: hide behind corporate walls or help us demonstrate real accountability." Stephen returned to the microphone. "I am choosing transparency. Starting tomorrow, I will open Harper Industries' books completely. We'll establish an independent oversight committee with community representatives to review all our practices. And every dollar of profit from those questionable transactions will go into a trust for Bridge Solutions community programs." The reporters erupted again, but Kevin raised his hand for silence. "This is what transformation looks like," he said. "Not perfect people making perfect decisions, but real people choosing to do better when confronted with their mistakes." As the evening progressed, Kevin and Stephen fielded questions together. Rather than deflecting or minimizing, they addressed each issue directly. Kevin's presence seemed to steady Stephen, helping him maintain his commitment to honesty even when the questions became brutal. Later that night, after the reporters had left and the gymnasium had emptied, Kevin, Stephen, and Mia sat in the quiet space. "Why did you help me?" Stephen asked Kevin. "You could have distanced yourself, saved your organization from being connected to this scandal." Kevin was quiet for a moment. "Because 8 years ago, when you made those choices with Maxwell, you were operating from a worldview that saw profit as the only measure of success. Today, you chose differently. That's exactly what Bridge Solutions is about, showing people there's another way to measure success." Mia checked her tablet one last time. Social media is divided, but trending positive. People are responding to the transparency. The phrase real accountability is trending. "Tomorrow won't be easy," Kevin warned. "Maxwell will fight back. The media will dig deeper. We'll need a strategy." Stephen nodded, feeling both exhausted and oddly liberated. "I've spent years playing corporate chess with people like Maxwell, but for the first time, I don't want to play that game anymore. I want to fix what's broken, not just in my company, but in how I've approached everything." What none of them realized was that Maxwell had been watching the press conference from his office, growing increasingly angry at how his carefully planned revenge was being transformed into something entirely different. He hadn't just wanted to expose Stephen, he'd wanted to destroy him. And now, he would have to resort to more desperate measures. The real battle was about to begin, and it would test not only their new alliance, but also their fundamental beliefs about redemption and justice. The following days unfolded in a whirlwind of activity. Kevin and Stephen established their base of operations in a conference room at Bridge Solutions' newly acquired office space, a modest but functional area in a renovated building in the community. "Maxwell's leaked more documents to the press," Mia announced, entering the room with her tablet. "But this time, they're doctored. He's trying to make the original transactions look worse than they were." Stephen studied the spreadsheets projected on the wall. "These numbers don't match our records. He's altered the dates and amounts to make it look like systematic fraud rather than aggressive tax avoidance." "That's actually helpful," Kevin said, typing rapidly on his laptop. "We can prove the documents are falsified. It undermines his credibility." He'd spent the past 3 days learning more about corporate finance than he'd ever expected to need. Clara had taken an active role as well, leveraging her connections throughout the community. Years of working in wealthy households had given her insights into the business world that proved unexpectedly valuable. She organized a network of support among local business owners and community leaders who had benefited from Bridge Solutions' initial programs. "The community center is packed," Clara reported, joining them. "People are there to sign up for our programs, but they're also offering to help with the investigation. Someone recognized Maxwell from when he tried to buy up properties here years ago." Kevin looked up from his computer. "What properties?" "A whole block of buildings," Clara explained. "About 8 years ago, the same time as these financial irregularities started." Stephen's face darkened with recognition. "The Riverside Development Project. Maxwell wanted to convert those properties into luxury condos. The community opposed it, and we withdrew the bid." He paused, realization dawning. "That's when he first suggested the offshore accounts, to hide the money we'd set aside for the project." Kevin quickly pulled up property records. The buildings were sold 6 months later to a series of shell companies. "Who owns them now?" Mia was already tracking the ownership chains. "It's complicated, but they all lead back to companies registered in Maxwell's wife's maiden name. He used our hidden accounts to secretly buy the properties," Stephen said quietly. "That's why he's doing this now. The area's value has tripled, and he's planning to develop it." Kevin stood up, pacing the room. "So this isn't just about revenge. He's trying to discredit you before you can expose his real estate scheme." "The community would be displaced," Clara added. "Hundreds of families." Stephen watched Kevin's face, recognizing the expression of determined problem-solving he'd come to respect. "What are you thinking?" "We need to shift the narrative," Kevin said. "This isn't just about corporate misconduct anymore. It's about community survival." He turned to Mia. "Remember our community investment trust model?" Mia's eyes widened. "You want to apply it to Maxwell's properties?" "Better," Kevin replied. "We're going to offer the current residents the first right of purchase, backed by Bridge Solutions and Harper Industries. Maxwell wants to gentrify the neighborhood? Let's help the community buy it first." Stephen leaned forward, intrigued. "Using the very money he tried to hide. It's poetic justice." Kevin was already outlining the plan. They would need to move quickly, coordinating with residents, arranging financing, and preparing legal documentation. Most importantly, they would need to present their proposal at the upcoming gala where Maxwell planned to announce his development project. "It's risky," Mia warned. "Maxwell won't go down without a fight." "No," Stephen agreed, "he won't. But we have something he doesn't, the truth, and a community standing together." As they worked late into the night, finalizing details and preparing documentation, none of them could have predicted how Maxwell would react when cornered. The gala wouldn't just be a corporate event. It would become a decisive moment that would determine the future of not just their reputations, but an entire community. Kevin looked around the room at his unlikely team. A reformed corporate CEO, his housekeeper mother, his brilliant best friend, and a growing network of community supporters. They were about to challenge not just one man's scheme, but an entire system of power and privilege. The real question was, would the truth be enough to overcome decades of entrenched interests and hidden agendas? The grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Hotel glittered with chandeliers and success. New York's business elite mingled over champagne, while outside, community members from Bridge Solutions gathered peacefully, holding signs supporting transparency and community rights. Stephen adjusted his tie, watching Maxwell work the room. His former partner looked confident, shaking hands and laughing, completely unaware of what was coming. Clara, dressed elegantly for the first time in Maxwell's presence, stood near the entrance, coordinating with community members through her phone. "The property documents are ready," Mia whispered, appearing beside Stephen. She wore a borrowed designer dress, but carried herself with natural dignity. "Legal team confirmed everything. Once Kevin presents, Maxwell can't stop it without exposing himself." Kevin stood at the podium, preparing for his presentation. The past week had revealed the full scope of Maxwell's scheme. The investigation had uncovered not just property manipulation, but a pattern of community exploitation spanning years. Maxwell had used the hidden accounts to systematically acquire properties in struggling neighborhoods, forcing out residents through deliberate negligence and price hikes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maxwell's voice boomed through the microphone. "Tonight marks a new chapter in urban development. Our Riverside Revival project will transform a struggling neighborhood into a beacon of progress." The crowd applauded politely. Maxwell continued, showing sleek renderings of luxury apartments and high-end retail spaces. "This $500 million development will bring jobs, tax revenue, and renewed vitality to a forgotten corner of our city." Kevin caught Stephen's eye and nodded. It was time. Stephen stepped forward. "Before we proceed, I believe we need to discuss the true origins of this project." Maxwell's smile flickered. "Stephen, this isn't the time for dash. It's exactly the time," Stephen interrupted, his voice firm. 8 years ago, you used our hidden accounts to secretly acquire these properties. You're not developing a struggling neighborhood. You're exploiting one you helped create." The room hushed. Maxwell's face reddened. "These are serious accusations from someone under investigation for fraud." "Yes, I am under investigation," Stephen acknowledged, "for actions we took together. But tonight isn't about our past crimes. It's about preventing a new one." Kevin took the podium, his presence commanding despite his youth. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have documentation proving that Mr. Maxwell deliberately neglected these properties, refusing repairs and raising rents to force out longtime residents. But we also have a solution." He presented their community investment trust model, explaining how it would allow current residents to become stakeholders in their own neighborhood's development. The numbers were compelling. Similar projects had shown better returns than traditional development while preserving community stability. Maxwell strode toward the podium. "This is absurd. These people can't possibly raise the capital dash. They already have," Mia announced, bringing up the financial commitments on the ballroom screens. "Combined with Bridge Solutions backing and clean investment from Harper Industries, we've secured full funding." Maxwell grabbed the microphone. "You're being swindled by a housekeeper's son and a CEO desperate to save his reputation. I have proof that Harper's crimes go far beyond what's been reported." "You mean these documents?" Kevin asked, displaying Maxwell's doctored records alongside the originals. We've proven these were altered, just like we've proven the shell companies owning these properties trace back to you." The room erupted in murmurs. Investors began edging away from Maxwell, who grew increasingly agitated. "This is a setup," he snarled. "You think you can destroy everything I've built? I've got judges in my pocket, politicians on speed dial. You're nothing." His outburst echoed through the suddenly silent ballroom. Phones recorded every word. In that moment, Maxwell realized his mistake. His carefully constructed image crumbled as he looked around the room, seeing not supporters, but witnesses to his own unraveling. But even as Maxwell's scheme collapsed, no one realized that his desperate final move would force Kevin to make an impossible choice, one that would test not just his ethics, but his very understanding of justice and redemption. The night wasn't over yet, and the hardest decision still lay ahead. As Maxwell stormed off the stage, Kevin received an urgent text from one of Bridge Solutions' volunteers. "Security breach at our office. Someone's accessing our servers." Mia appeared at his shoulder, showing him her tablet. "They're trying to delete our evidence. All of it. Not just deleting," Kevin realized, fingers flying over his phone. "They're planting false data, making it look like we fabricated everything about Maxwell." Steven joined them, his face grim. "Maxwell has a tech team, top-tier hackers. They can make it look like we manipulated every piece of evidence we have." The ballroom had descended into chaos, with reporters pushing forward and photographers' flashes creating a strobe effect. Through the confusion, Kevin spotted Maxwell near the exit, speaking urgently into his phone. "Got it," Mia announced. "The hack's coming from a private server farm in Manhattan. Maxwell's team is there right now." Kevin made a quick decision. "Mia, lock down our backup servers." "Mom," he called to Clara, "get the community leaders to secure the physical documents we collected." "Steven, keep the press here. We need witnesses for what's about to happen." "What are you going to do?" Steven asked. "Something either very smart or very stupid," Kevin replied, already heading for the door. He'd spotted something in the code of the hack attempt, a familiar signature. "I know who's leading Maxwell's tech team." 30 minutes later, Kevin walked into a high-security server facility. Using the building's public business center as cover, he'd managed to access the facility's internal network. As he suspected, he recognized the lead hacker, James Chun, his former coding mentor from the community center. "Hello, James," Kevin said quietly. James spun around, fingers freezing over his keyboard. "Kevin? How did you—" "You still use the same coding shortcuts you taught me," Kevin said, moving closer. "The ones that helped me win my first hackathon." Around them, other hackers tensed, but James waved them down. "Maxwell's paying us well, kid. Walk away." "Before you finish this," Kevin said, "look at what you're actually erasing." He pulled up files on James's screen, stories of families fighting displacement, elderly residents facing eviction, small businesses being squeezed out. "This isn't about corporate games anymore. This is about our community." James stared at the screen, then at his hands. "Maxwell said this was just corporate espionage. Normal business stuff. When you taught me coding," Kevin continued, "you said technology should empower people, not exploit them. Remember?" A tense silence filled the room. Finally, James sighed. "What do you want me to do?" "Help me protect the truth," Kevin said. "All of it." What happened next would later be called a masterclass in ethical hacking. James and his team, under Kevin's guidance, not only stopped the deletion, but created an unalterable blockchain record of all their evidence. They tracked every attempt Maxwell had made to cover his tracks, creating a digital trail that even the best lawyers couldn't dispute. Back at the gala, Maxwell was confidently telling reporters that all evidence against him would soon be revealed as fabricated. His phone buzzed. The color drained from his face as he read the message. Hack failed. Teams switched sides. Everything's secured. Kevin returned to find the ballroom transformed. FBI agents had arrived, responding to Maxwell's inadvertent confession about having judges and politicians in his pocket. Steven was giving a statement, while Mia coordinated with community leaders who were already planning how to implement the investment trust. Maxwell saw Kevin enter and made one last desperate move. "I'll double whatever they're paying you," he called out. "Triple it. Name your price." Kevin walked past him without a word, joining his mother, who stood proudly watching the community she'd served for so long finally receive justice. You know, Stephen said, joining them, Bridge Solutions is going to need a proper CEO. Someone who understands both technology and community. Someone who's proven they can handle a crisis. Kevin looked at his mother, then at Mia, then back at Stephen. Actually, he said, I think we need a whole team of CEOs. People from different backgrounds with different perspectives. That's what this was all about, wasn't it? Bridging divides? As the night ended, reporters asked Kevin for one final statement. He looked around at his unlikely coalition, a reformed corporate executive, a former housekeeper turned community leader, a brilliant strategist from a local bodega, and a coding mentor who chose ethics over profit. This isn't a story about winning or losing, Kevin said. It's about choosing who we want to be and having the courage to change when we realize we've been wrong. The real work starts tomorrow. And so it did. Bridge Solutions became a model for community-led development across the country. Stephen transformed Harper Industries into a leader in ethical business practices. Maxwell faced justice for his crimes. But more importantly, a community learned that their voices mattered, that change was possible, and that bridges could be built across even the widest divides. The challenges weren't over. They never are. But now they face them together, proving that success doesn't have to come at the expense of others, and that the greatest transformations often begin with a simple choice to do better.